Okay. This video is going to help you try to understand your conventions lesson for this paper, which is balancing parallel structures. Parallel structure is a hugely important lesson. It's one that students often find to be very complicated. And in the beginning, they're sort of frustrated with finding parallel structure. But after we practice it for several papers, I think you're going to really start to notice your writing improving. I had a student many years ago that after this lesson said, "Oh my gosh, why hasn't anybody ever taught me this before? Because it's just made my writing so much smoother." And so that's what this lesson is really about. It's not that you don't have ideas. It's that all those times when your teacher might have written awkward next to your sentence, it's going to try to help you avoid that sort of awkwardness so that your language is a lot stronger. So I want to actually start you out by asking you to open up this document, right? The Parallel Essays document. And I want you to read these two essays. So if you haven't done this yet, then you need to go into Google Classroom and find this because that's where I've placed them. There are two essays in the same document. Both of them come from the same writer, Stephen Wilbers, and he's writing for the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, and he actually published these articles many years ago in the early 90s. So I'm going to stop for a moment and let you hit pause if you haven't read these, and I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that. Okay, now I assume that you have read the articles, and so I want to start us off by talking about the main ideas in these articles. This first article just tries to explain what parallel structure is using the analogy of a contract. So it says that using parallel structure honors a contract with the reader. I want you to think about contracts briefly for a moment. Contracts are agreements between two parties where both of them get something in return. Think about a contract that you might sign someday for your first job, right? Your job has certain requirements of you that you are contractually obligated to fulfill, and then what you get out of that is a certain amount of money. And if either party breaks that contract, then there's problems in the relationship, right? So if you think about parallel structure as being a contract between you, the writer, and the reader, then when you write well, you are honoring that contract with them because their expectation is that you're going to make it as easy as possible for them to read. Your expectation is that you pray that they're actually going to follow through and read your stuff. So if you make your grammar structure as smooth as possible, they will be happy and continue reading, okay? So the article then goes on to give you a lot of examples of what parallel structure is. You have a really nice paragraph of definition basically here. So it's about creating consistency in your grammar. Ideas that are related to each other, and in your textbook you might find them called coordinate ideas, need to be expressed in parallel grammatical form. So if they're similar in content and you want people to think of this language together as a unit, then you should express it using parallel structure, okay? We'll get into the textbook in a moment and we'll talk more specifically about how to do it. But basically, the rest of the article is just reminding you about when parallel structure is bad, how you can fix it. And you fix it by being consistent in your grammar. So in order to fix some of your sentences, you're going to have to play the grammar speak game, meaning you're going to have to recognize nouns versus verbs, adjectives versus adverbs, clauses versus phrases. And if any of that seems too difficult for you, then that's a time when we can have a conversation one-on-one about any of the language in your papers. The second article does a really good job of telling you why we care about parallel structure. And as far as a rhetorical strategy goes, parallel structure does a nice job of creating emphasis, and emphasis can then create power for the writer. So in this article, you've got a lot of famous writers, sometimes with their very famous sentences, that Stephen Wilbers is simply pointing out that part of the power of these famous sentences comes from the parallel grammatical structure, okay? This is one that's probably the most famous for you, And Stephen Wilbur shows you that it originally was not Kennedy's line. Kennedy actually took it from an ancient Roman. But the parallel structure is part of the power that makes it really good. Okay? So again, you've got that definition of parallel structure coming up in this article. And then you just have a lot of practice in how to fix bad parallel structure. And that practice in fixing bad parallel structure is going to be really important to you for this lesson. Excuse me, I'm sneezing. All right. One thing I want to point out before we leave this article is that they talk about an example from Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. And you'll notice that they put in the repetition of that phrase, I have a dream. And I want to remind you that repetition is inherently parallel, right? Because parallel structure just means that you are repeating a grammar structure. Well, if you are repeating word for word a phrase throughout your text, obviously your grammar structure is going to be repeated exactly as well. So kind of keep that in mind. Repetition and parallel structure can work really well hand in hand sometimes to create power and emphasis in your writing. Basically what it comes down to is that Stephen Wilbers is saying, if you've got a moment that's important, and if you want to heighten the drama, if you want to make something more intense in your writing, potentially try putting it in parallel grammatical form, because that's going to do the job of creating that emphasis and power for you. Okay, at this point, you can set aside the parallel essays, and I want you to get into your Launchpad. So this is going to be the resources that are involved with the Pocket Style Manual. So you can pause this video in a moment and take the time to open up Launchpad. If you're going through for Blackhawk English 101, you're going to go through Canvas and get in it through Launchpad. If you're doing it through my AP Lang class, then you're going to stop and you're going to get actually into the Pocket Style Manual link that I've given you. I also want you to open up your textbooks to Rule 3. Okay? And you're also going to see that I have made Rule 3, Balancing Parallel Ideas, to be your assignment. And so this assignment has a couple parts. We want to read through Part A and Part B, looking at items in a series and paired ideas. And then you also have this learning curve quiz, and we'll get to that at the end. It's an adaptive quiz, which means that the quicker you catch on to it, the faster that you're done with that quiz. So anyway, let's go back to your textbook's definition of what parallel structure is, so that we can hopefully look at the examples and just kind of walk you through what's going on here. When you have parallel structure, you are, I'm going to back up because I want to make sure that I see the original. I think I want to go here. Can I go here? Nope, not where I want to go. Sorry, you guys. I wanted to look at the original lesson. So let's see if I can do that here. I cannot. All right. So, in your actual textbook, the physical copy that all of you have, I want you to notice that you've got a couple sample sentences here, and I just want to talk about them briefly. What the Pocket Style Manual is trying to show you is that parallel structure generally happens either in a list, right, which is what items in a series are, or it happens in pairs. And you can have parallel structure of words, which is the first example there. A kiss can be a comma, a question mark, or an exclamation point. That is a balanced series of parallel nouns. It also, in the second example, has a pair, right, a pair of verb phrases, and they're in the to be form, the infinitive form. So we're going to look more closely here at how you fix items in a series, and then part B, which is items in pairs. And I'm going to give you some pointers, and I'll show you how to use the adaptive quiz. So when you have items in a series, you're going to recognize that series by the use of commas, right? And remember that items in a series generally have at minimum 3. Most of the time you're looking at somewhere between 3 and 5. If you have more than 5, then the sentence is probably overwhelming. What I want you to think about when you're trying to identify poor parallel structure in a series is going back to like the Sesame Street children's video that when you were little. They'd have 3 objects come out, and it would be like 2 beach balls and a duck. And you'd have to figure out One of these things is not like the other. One of these things just doesn't belong. And obviously, if you have 2 beach balls and a duck, you know that the problem is the duck. So this is what you're doing basically with your items in the series. You're trying to figure out which ones are the beach balls and which one is the duck. So in this case, we're going to notice it right away in terms of spelling, because we can see we have an ing verb, and then this one is actually a noun. Well, you can't have verb, verb, noun in a list, because remember, balancing parallel structure is all about keeping the same grammatical form. So in this case, we want to shift this away from a noun, but really the word weights needs to be in the sentence. What's missing is simply the verb. So now we have cross-training involves a variety of exercises such as running, swimming, and lifting weights. So adding that ing verb into the list now makes the parallel structure fit, so you're honoring the contract that you've created with the reader. Okay, in this sentence, again, we have a list. The words confidence and discipline are nouns, but what we have here is a clause. So our series goes noun, noun, clause. Well, that doesn't work. So the easiest thing to do here is take this clause and change it into a noun. So we're sharing the same idea, but now confidence, discipline, and creativity are all balanced in their grammar. This one's always an interesting example to take a look at because it almost starts sounding a little bit like a rambling run-on sentence. Racing to work, Sam drove down the middle of the road, ran one red light and 2 stop signs. Again, what the writer thinks they're doing is putting 3 actions together, but what we're missing here is the verb. You could take this comma out, not put in the word ignored, and say, racing to work, Sam drove down the middle of the road and ran 1 red light and 2 stop signs. But that seems to have too many ands in it. So instead, the easiest way to do it here is to simply add in that verb that's missing. So a couple things for you to think about. First of all, notice that quite often the problem is a verb problem. So watch the verb structures in your sentences. I also want you to understand that sometimes the way that we fix parallel structure is by adding words, like here and here. But sometimes the way that we fix parallel structure is by chopping some words out and replacing words. So you've got both of those options as ways to do this better. Let's go home and then let's go to balancing paired ideas. Paired ideas involve 2 items, right? And we have 3 main ways that we put 2 items together. You're either using a fanboy, mainly these 3, right? And, but, and, or. Though nor would also work with this. Or you are using what's called a correlative conjunction, which means you've got a pair of conjunctions together. That pair of conjunctions can become really tricky for you guys. So we're going to take a lot of care in trying to understand this one. Or you're using comparison words where you're putting 2 items next to one another, like using the word than or as in terms of a simile or something like that. So this first example is using the word and as your balance point, which is your coordinating conjunction. And what you're doing here is basically you're balancing your verbs. So this is a sentence that has a single subject but a compound verb. And when we have that compound verb structure, we need to make sure they're the same. And right now in the original sentence, they are not. We have the ing form of the verb, and then we have the present tense form of the verb. They have to match one another. Now, what's good about this is that when you have a balanced pair, it actually doesn't matter to me whether you're balancing it around the first word or the second word, right? If you like reducing here as a verb form, then you change this one to extending. But you could also flip that. If you look at this and say, no, I like the way the word extend reads here, then we could keep that word and instead change this one. Listen to me read the sentence now. Many states reduce property taxes for homeowners and extend financial aid in the form of tax credits to renters. So it doesn't matter which one that I do as long as I'm making those 2 items in that pair parallel with one another. Okay, this example is looking at those correlative conjunctions. So first of all, I want to show you what the correlative conjunction is. Whoops, I don't even know what I'm doing here. I want to try to highlight the correlative conjunction, but I do not know. I don't know, you guys. I don't know what I'm doing. So let me just try to talk it out for you without the use of highlighters and such. Not only, but also is your correlative conjunction. And when I teach people how to do this on a piece of paper or on the board, I usually have you underline the correlative conjunction. So if you want to underline it in your textbook there, you can. And then I have people put a slash mark immediately after that correlative pair. So a slash mark after only and a slash mark after also. And what I try to teach you is whatever comes immediately after that slash mark, which in this case is a noun phrase, right? A prolific inventor, has to match grammatically to what's going on here. And unfortunately right now in the original form it's not. Here we have a noun phrase, here we have a verb. Noun phrases and verbs are not the same grammar. So notice that your textbook eliminates the verb, so now what comes immediately after the second half of the correlative conjunction does happen to be a noun phrase. Thomas Edison was not only a prolific inventor, but also a successful entrepreneur. You can do it another way. Just like up above, we had two different ways to do this. If I really liked this word was here, I can keep it. But my problem is what comes immediately after this correlative conjunction has to match, which would mean that I need to move this word was here. So this is another way that you could write the sentence with correct parallel structure. Thomas Edison not only was a prolific inventor, but also was a successful entrepreneur. So again, it depends on what you like. It depends on what sounds good to your ear. A lot of you use the not only but also structure, and a lot of you use the either or and the neither nor. So be careful because these are tricky spots that students often do poorly with their parallel structure. The last example is that comparison where you're using the word than. It is easier to speak in abstractions than grounding one's thoughts in reality. So again, you need to find your balance point, and we realize, oh yeah, again, it's a verb problem. So either you're going to make your second verb here, grounding, match your first one to speak by putting them both into their infinitive form, or if you want to keep grounding, then you're going to scratch this out and change it to speaking. It is easier speaking in abstractions than grounding one's thoughts in reality. Okay? Now, the last note that they tell you about here is that sometimes you're going to want to repeat words because that's going to be the best way for you to create parallel structure. Sometimes your sentences are so long that we kind of lose track of the elements of that. And so they call them function words, but these function words are small, simple words, sometimes like prepositions, like the word by or the word to, or sometimes it's about subordinating conjunctions. Oh, how attractive. The video just stopped right there. I'm so sorry, children. Anyway, focusing down here again, sometimes you want to repeat the subordinating conjunctions. The word that is a word that sometimes when you repeat it, it makes the sentence structure much more clear. Sometimes very similarly doing so with the word because. Take a look at this sentence and read it the bad way first. Our study revealed that left-handed students were more likely to have trouble with classroom desks, and rearranging desks for exam periods was useful. What gets confusing is, without repeating this word here that they put in, it kind of sounds like left-handed students have a hard time rearranging desks. That's not actually what's going on. If we look at the structure of the sentence, our main noun here is the study, and the main verb is revealed. Well, what was revealed? This statement, that left-handed students were more likely to have trouble with classroom desks, and this second statement, that rearranging desks for exam periods was useful. So repeating that function word that was present at the beginning of this subordinating clause is a good reminder that we actually have two subordinating clauses here. So sometimes I will ask you to repeat function words in your sentences in order to improve them, and that's what I mean by it. The last thing that I want to say to you is that parallel structure is something that you actually do all the time. In fact, you do it so often that you're not even aware of it. You become more aware of it in a sentence when you're bad at it. And so in the beginning, sometimes it's really hard for students to recognize when they have done parallel structure poorly. But it's not a matter of you chopping ideas so much as it is changing the structure so that your sentences flow more smoothly. So the last thing I want you to do now that we've looked through this is I want you to take the adaptive quiz. So you're going to go into this learning curve. Let's see if I can get into it. To do. Nope, I just want to do it. Adaptive quiz. And remember that the adaptive quiz has you basically do a bunch of questions that have to do with it. You have a target score that you're trying to get through, and once you get that target score, then you're done, and it'll tell me that you got 100 points in the grade book. So I highly encourage you to do this exercise because it's going to help you identify and correct them, which is something you're going to have to do in your papers. And if you don't get them done in your papers, then you'll end up doing more exercises to try to practice that skill. Let me know if you have questions. I will talk to you later. See ya.